and the choices we decide to take, how we act in different situations already now, today. It has traditionally been thought that past experiences guide our behavior, but psychologist Martin Seligman and colleagues argue that our projections of the future actually play a more significant role. This idea of future images influencing present actions is commonly recognized by many futurists in terms of human decision-making. However, biologist Robert Rosen suggests that every living being, even the trees, anticipate the future. That is why he calls us anticipatory systems. This worked in the morning. According to Rosen, every proactive system has a predictive model of itself. This predictive model demonstrates the system in its ideal form, the way it is expected to evolve. The predictive model directs through so-called effectors how the system itself works and how it evolves. This interaction between the predictive model and the system itself can have two consequences. Either the system changes so that it will evolve more accurately towards an ideal form demonstrated by the predictive model, or the predictive model will change when, as a result of experience, it can be seen that the desired direction should be different than previously assumed. A similar model of learning has been presented by, among others, the aforementioned psychologist Seligman and his colleagues. The so-called feed-forward feedback model describes the human learning process. According to the model, our expectations formulate the goals we want to achieve. Through experience and experimentation, we find out what seems possible and what doesn't work. As a result of reflection of these experiences, we either change our behavior or our expectations. Even if this process I just described is the same for all of us, we still do not form similar visions or projections of the future with the same data in same situation. This is due to differences in our personalities. We select, process, interpret, and evaluate the information around us in different ways and draw different conclusions from it. These differences can be described in terms of futures consciousness. In my dissertation, I have developed together with my colleagues a definition of futures consciousness that can be applied to individuals as well as organizations. In addition, we have developed a way to measure its manifestation among individuals. According to the definition we have developed, futures consciousness consists of the individual qualities of a human system that influence the way in which the system can produce, explore, evaluate, and update these predictive models or images of the future for itself and for its environment. The most significant differences between these qualities are summarized in the following 5 dimensions: time perspective, agency beliefs, openness to alternatives, systems perception, and concern for others. These 5 dimensions describe what kind of future images we tend to create. They highlight how our expectations, assumptions, biases, and attitudes influence the way we see the future and how we respond to it. Next, I will present shortly these 5 dimensions. In the work I'm presenting today, we have focused in particular on defining futures consciousness at the individual level. And to this end, we have identified existing psychological concepts that best describe each of these 5 dimensions. The first dimension, time perspective, is characterized by the psychological concepts of future orientation and consideration of future consequences. The way people approach time varies. Some are more focused on the past, others in the present or the future. Inherently, people have prioritized the closest threat, since if you do not survive that, a more distant threat is not relevant anymore. However, the need for long-term thinking is ever more crucial as societies have become more complex and people have overpopulated this planet. Understanding future consequences of our actions is a prerequisite for us to be able to make long-term plans and achieve future goals. But how far-reaching consequences are we really willing to consider? The second dimension, agency beliefs, is characterized by a locus of control, self-efficacy, and optimism. Agency beliefs describe how much we have faith in our capability to influence our own or shared future images and how we see our own role in their realization. Do we feel we are in control of our own futures, or is all decided by fate or some other external force? And do we feel able to achieve the results we are striving for? Here, our beliefs are the key. It is not so much a question of if one can objectively have an impact, but if you feel that you can. Optimistic perceptions of the future reinforce these beliefs about one's own agency. Third dimension, systems perception, is characterized by systemic and holistic thinking and ecopsychological self-image. Systemic perception of the world highlights the interconnectedness within and between human and natural systems, how we live in a complex web of relationships and interdependencies between people, societies, and ecosystems. We differ in our ability to perceive these systems and hence in perceiving the complex consequences of actions and their potential and impacts near and far in space and time. Some of us also have a stronger tendency to experience everything around us as part of own self, while others feel more detached from other systems. The fourth dimension, concern for others, is characterized by self-transcendence values and identification with all humanity. The rationale for this dimension stems from the systemic perception that our futures on this planet are intertwined. If we aspire a better future for ourselves, we should do the same for others. Our motivation to improve the life of others beyond self, however, varies. For some of us, our main focus is on caring for those who are closest to us, while others care for all humanity or the whole planet. The question here is how far are we actually willing to jeopardize our own interests in order to promote the common good? The fifth dimension, openness to alternatives, is characterized by openness to new experiences, critical thinking, and intolerance of uncertainty. The future is not a direct continuum of the past, but a series of endlessly novel possible events. Some of us are inherently curious to explore and consider these new options, while others are not. Some may find the uncertainty of the future distressing, while for others it may be a source of ongoing inspiration. However, contemplating these possibilities requires the ability to critically question established truths, traditions, and habits, and to search alternatives from outside the box. Based on the definition of the 5 dimensions of futures consciousness, we developed a psychometric measure to study the manifestation of futures consciousness among individuals. The futures consciousness scale consists of 20 short intuitive questions, as do so many other psychological tests. So the scale was developed and tested in accordance with the scientific requirements in the field of psychology, and it has been validated in Finnish and English. The current version of the scale is already a revised version. The first we published already earlier. The current version is unlikely to be the last, since hopefully more new updates applications will be developed in the future. Those of you who are in the audience, you are welcome to test yourselves at this website, fctest.u2fi, here at the bottom of the slide. You should use the group key according to the language you wish to fill in the test. FC Testi Finn for the Finnish speakers, and FC Test Ing for the English speakers. Why then would measuring futures consciousness have any relevance? After all, measuring inevitably simplifies a complex and multifaceted phenomena. However, the use of psychometric scale allows for experimental research that can examine the significance and effects of futures consciousness in or its relationship to other phenomena. As a benefit from simplification, we may learn something new about future thinking. Using the scale to gather empirical data allows us to study, for example, how living conditions, culture, or education affects individuals' futures consciousness, or the ways in which it affects our lifestyles, behaviors, or choices. For example, a recent study in the UK found that futures consciousness helped people cope with the constraints of the pandemic. The development of the futures consciousness scale empirically demonstrates that the 5 dimensions I have listed above are indeed interrelated. An individual who is prone to think further ahead is also more likely to be systems-oriented, concerned for others, open to alternatives, and believe in their own opportunity to influence. Moreover, an individual who is strong in several dimensions is more likely to seek to influence the future actively than an individual who is strong in only one of these dimensions. Futures consciousness is thus more diverse and holistic concept than just looking ahead in time. At the same time, measuring reveals how different our futures consciousness profiles may be. These differences should be taken into account in, for example, strategy and foresight processes. Coordinators of these processes should ensure that people with different strengths are involved. In addition, these processes should be designed to support the development of the participants' futures consciousness. As I already explained before, our images of the future affect our choices in the present. Therefore, researching futures consciousness can help in understanding motivations behind these choices. As part of my research, I compared the futures consciousness profiles of Finnish elite members and their preferences of various radical policies to reduce household consumption of natural resources. Using the 5 dimensions of futures consciousness, I was able to identify their various motivations. Those who were open to alternatives identified weak signals and recognized potential for change everywhere. And even radical change seemed desirable for them. On the other hand, those who were mainly concerned for the well-being of Finns rather than the whole planet, or for whom the long-term consequences of actions were less significant, they were less willing to accept radical changes. It is important to note here that in terms of policy acceptability, my conclusion would not be that we all change. Rather, if we want to have change, we need to be able to find arguments that are attractive to individuals with different futures consciousness profiles. The concept of futures consciousness arose from the need to make better decisions and find ways to avoid typical pitfalls of future thinking. The future we live in today, full of global challenges, is not a coincidence. Crossing the planetary boundaries or continuous armed conflicts are the results of decisions and actions that have been made in recent decades or even centuries. The question is, could those choices have been better? And could we learn to make better choices? Although current research suggests that future thinking does not change easily, The way we have defined futures consciousness takes into account the possibility of development. Futures consciousness can be developed in many ways already familiar to us, by visioning, discussing, imagining, by participating in futures workshops and futures education courses. These methods need to be further developed and used. That is why it is important that the Finnish high school curriculum, for example, emphasize the development of future thinking. The futures consciousness scale developed here can be helpful when studying the effects of these various measures and interventions. The goal of developing the concept of futures consciousness was to identify futures competencies and foresight capabilities that are needed to create such visions of the future that include the potential for a better future. The 5 dimensions of futures consciousness provide us with important perspectives to an unknown future. The notion of time perspective helps us to be patient and to see how sacrifices in the present may reward us in the future. Agency beliefs provide us with self-confidence and motivation to try to change our futures. Openness to alternatives reminds us how nearly everything is still possible, and there are alternatives for even the most dystopian future images. Systems perception helps us to see multiple impacts different solutions may have, and concern for others guides us to find solutions that bring the most benefit to as many people as possible. These perspectives from the 5 dimensions make it possible for us to create forward-looking, well-grounded, diverse, responsible, and empowering visions of the future, which hopefully will in time turn into reality. Professor Hines, I respectfully ask you, as the opponent duly appointed by the director of the doctoral program, to present your comments on my doctoral thesis.
Well, I want to thank Sanna for giving myself as a representative of Houston the opportunity to come to Turku and see that you actually do exist. We have been reading about you for a very long time. We thought you were real, and now we see we've met the people, we've seen the space, and we know indeed that the good work that you've been doing for many years is for real. So very happy to see Houston and Finland working together more closely. So I come to this particular event back in 2018. One of my roles was in the professional association. Each year we recognize good work in the field. And there's a committee of judges and so forth that does those things. And back in 2018, one of the articles that came across was nominated as one of the great works in the field was the 5 dimensions of futures consciousness. Now, there's a lot of works that come through that program, and I must say, I'm a busy guy. I don't read them all. But I thought, this is interesting. Let me take a look at this. It's just fascinating stuff. And I was so pleased. Now, I cannot actually use any influence to decide who wins the awards. I just kind of coordinate the ceremony. But I was so happy that in 2018, our judges acknowledged that paper as one of the most significant works in the field. So I was first introduced to this work in that capacity back in 2018, and as I say, very intrigued. I think maybe one other thing about my background that might also explain why I'm here and why I'm happy to be here is I spent 25 years working as a professional futurist before I came to the academic world. So I have a very deep interest in how do we make these models more useful in our work. And so, again, when I saw the 5 dimensions model, that we can use that. That's a good thing. I can see how we can apply this. So in my opening, I thought just a couple of the ways that intrigued me about how we might use this model. So I think one, as Sanna mentioned, is helping us understand how we can more effectively develop positive images of the future. Is there anything we need more today? I don't know. Maybe not. Positive images that this is where we want to go as a planet, right? And we really honestly don't have. We have the seminal work that was done on images was from the 1970s, And we have not done a lot, we don't have a lot of good, useful frameworks. And how do we help develop those images and help people, as Sanna was saying, help people understand how to use them? So I think this is a nice step along the road to how do we develop more effective images to lead us into the future? In the organizational capacity, how do we can use this model in our work with organizations and our work with clients. So I spent 10 years working inside two different Kellogg company, probably familiar with Frosted Flakes, and Dow Chemical, working as a futurist inside the organization. I developed a couple of tools myself, but one of the things that was so exciting about this, when I read the model that Sanna had developed, was not only did it make intuitive sense, they actually did the research. They did the empirical research to say, we didn't just make this up, we actually validated it. And you'd be surprised, folks, there's not, because of the nature of how our field is developed, there's not a lot of that. There's not a lot of that. So this is a precious thing that we have here. And it was very exciting to see that. And in the dissertation work, Sanna had mentioned this gap between, I guess, some ideas we have about how things work and what are we actually validated. So exciting stuff. Another application of the model, obviously now I am in the academic space, and one of the things that we teach is, the future. We called it the futures mindset. We'll have to make it futures consciousness, but for now we called it futures mindset, and it was so close to the model here. We talked about critical thinking. We talked about systems thinking. We talked about creativity, and then we look and we see this model that says those things and add something to it. So our experience in how to develop a futures consciousness, a futures mindset, was very close to that. But now again, we have the validated research. So I'm very excited that we can now make some tweaks to how we describe futures mindset. And as we say, we're not just making this up. And then finally, I think one of the things I was very happy to see in the work was, I mentioned that I've worked in the professional association for a long time. About 5 years ago, we developed a competency model, which is a torturous year-long process designed to make you not want to finish it. But we did it. Very useful thing. And again, I think a super useful thing for our field. And I was so pleased to see that Sanna had connected her model back to those competencies. Because one of the things that I think is crucial to us as a field, as we try to build this foresight and futures field, is that we keep building forward, right? So that if we introduce a new framework, it honors and builds upon the work that's gone before us, so that we're moving, we're kind of moving in a consistent direction, and to see new models building upon those frameworks. It's just so, oh, good, thank you. We don't have to start over again, because you can imagine a lot of folks will introduce a new model and pretend that they just made it up and nobody is we'll leave it at that. So building upon the work that's already done is such a nice and useful thing for our field. So again, I guess I am really super excited to be able to have the opportunity to discuss this in detail with Sanna in front of you. And with that, I think it's time we got to it. All right. You can see I have a color-coded system for how I'm going to ask my questions today. And we're going to start with purple. All right. So one of the things that we've learned at Houston, so I answer a lot of questions from prospective students. And they say, they're interested in the program. What's it all about? And we always ask, well, how did you hear about it? And it's amazing how many people will say these two words. Maybe it's an English thing. I stumbled upon. We called it the stumble upon. Now we need the empirical research to know if that's really, but we observed this, that people just, how do you find out that this new thing even exists? So I thought Sanna did a nice job of explaining the evolution of the model, but if we could just maybe go back one step and say, as you were thinking about planetary sustainability, and thinking this is an important issue, how did you end up connecting into this field of foresight and saying that, oh, this particular field would be a way that can help me develop or help you develop your sense of planetary sustainability. So how did you stumble into this world of foresight, as many of you are doing right now here today?
Difficult question. I do have to kind of try to dig in my memory how it happened.
Yeah.
It might have been that I actually met our Custos today, Markku, in some other projects and got interested. And I guess also from my previous, since I have a background as a practitioner as well, there was always this talk about like there are some futures somewhere in Finland, there is actually some research done about this. And that kind of got me interested, like maybe there is something in here that gives me something that I'm looking for. Okay. But yes, I stumbled upon it.
That's all right. All right. Well, thank you very much. And so another question I was curious about in terms of the development of your model. We talk about that, some people seem to think from the top down, that is, they see an idea about the future and they go, "Ooh, that makes a lot of sense. Let me then go find some research to see if I'm right." And I think then there are other people who come from the bottom up and they do a bunch of research and then say, here are the themes that come from that. So some people see the answer first and go do the data. Some people start with the data and develop the answer. And I guess I was curious to you, as you were doing your research, did you have those aha moments where you decided to say, "Oh, I see competency number 3," right? So I guess maybe if you could tell us a little bit, like in terms of how you think, like how did those competencies start to emerge? I can imagine it must have, as you're looking through a massive amount of data, it must have been challenging to say, which of these 5 ones. And so tell us a little bit about the journey of how you developed those 5.
Yeah, I think it kind of started off by, well, at the time when we started, I had already kind of been studying futures research. So there was kind of an amount of literature I was already kind of referring to, I was familiar with. And so we kind of started discussing that especially with Matti. We discussed and thought, like, so how does this work? What could it be? And I think actually we came up with kind of an initial list of ideas what they could be. And the more we searched for these definitions and the more we searched for literature, we saw that it kind of all seemed to just be building on top of each other and actually coming back to the same. And then when we analyzed it from, we kind of had an original idea, like a hypothesis maybe. And then once we kind of went through the data, it just seemed like it was really fitting to that. Yeah.
So that's an exciting point in the research when you start to see, oh, wait, it's making sense. I know you mentioned to me that you started the research back in 2015. I suspect, like most of us, there was probably a point where you said, "What have I done?" Why? So how did you get through the difficult points in your research? I mean, I'm sure they came. You're here, you've made it.
Well, I guess one of the most, some of the most important things, one of them was that I was very lucky to have full-time funding. So I actually did have the time in my hands to think. Without that, I don't think I would have ever kind of gotten into this, because I wouldn't have had the time to start looking for something which I wasn't sure if it's really going to pay out.
Right.
And having that funding and having that time just to spend
Right.
and to think, it was a luxury. I hope that I will have that some point in my life again.
Right.
Because I think that was really critical. And then, of course, having wonderful colleagues who kind of were interested and dedicated and committed and interested, who had the same curiosity as I did. That, okay, let's just try to do this. And there were points when we seriously thought, okay, just trash bin and let's see what to do next. And if I would have been there alone, it might have been that the trash bin would have been my choice. But there was always somebody else who said like, oh, come on, go ahead. And maybe the third aspect is that they actually, quite early on when we started working on this, there were many colleagues from the center who kind of went like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what is it that you're doing? You know, we can see that this could be, you know, this could become something. And having this kind of response to our work was important. And I guess for that, I do have to thank my habits of maybe sometimes too early to start talking to people that, you know, this is what I'm doing. And I'd like to hear your comments, because of course, then you kind of people come back and you go like, well, I haven't, you know, it's still not finished. But at the same time, we would get this positive response from others and saying like, you know, go ahead, that this is, we have expectations from this.
Right. So maybe if you wouldn't mind telling me or telling us the story about how you started out working with the ideas of elites about the long-term future, and you realize that, wait, we don't really have a good framework for understanding how people think about the future. So how you started with this idea and then said, oh wait, I have to go back and develop the framework for I had that interesting idea, but then I had to go back and do the framework.
Yeah, I guess since I had been working with sustainability issues for decades,
yes,
I had kind of developed at least my perception was that what it really comes down to in many cases, that the change comes down to the key people, like the key actors. Like what do they decide to do in different situations? Do they push for, you know, kind of sustainable solutions, or do they push for something else? So I was interested in elites from that perspective, that I thought that these people have the power, but what do they use it for, and what is their motivation to make those decisions? And well, naturally, I thought that it must have something to do with their perspective. That because, you know, like if you want to, for example, work for sustainability, people talk about, you know, decades, 50 years, 100 years ahead. And so it must have to do something with their perspective on time. That was my original kind of idea. And so when I embarked on this research on the elites, I expected to find a framework. I thought that, you know, since futures research has been there already for quite a while,
where is it?
Somebody must have, you know, developed a framework, but it didn't exist. We searched for it, but we couldn't find anything that would be useful enough. And that's the way it started. I realized, okay, well, you know, back some steps, start working first with this. Like, how are you going to ask these people or kind of observe their futures thinking? And that's how it got started.
May I say that I relate very much to that, where we think surely somebody has done this work, and then you find out that it will be me or I, or yes, which is also an exciting. It's kind of nice, I suppose, a more mature field where everything's already been studied. It makes it more challenging. In our case, it's so wide open because we haven't developed as many of those theoretical frameworks yet. So thank you for doing that. So I was thinking maybe we look on page 25 for a sec here, and where you have the section on foresight thinking. And I had mentioned that I was so pleased to see that you were building off the competency model. And just to be clear, I don't think the competency model is the right model or the perfect model, but it's a start. When we say, how do futurists do their work? We agree that these are some of the basic components of how we do our work. So in terms of applying your framework to that, have you had some ideas about what, you mentioned in here, currently there is no method used to assess foresight competency. Do you have some thoughts on how we might be able to use your model to say, not only like, here's what we do, but how do we do it well, or how might we do it better?
I do have to say that this has been an ongoing topic of discussion. I have colleagues, well, some of them unfortunately are sick today, with whom we have been discussing that this is the step that we should take. And we have colleagues who have been working for, for decades already, like with futures education, building competencies. And they have been kind of, or we have been kind of discussing that we have to kind of find a way to combine these two. We don't have an answer yet. I hope that there will be an article about that at some point. But I guess what I would, at least since I'm most familiar with these 5 dimensions, I would probably start like from these dimensions and try to identify like what are the competencies related to these dimensions that you need to create, like, for example, develop creativity to be open to alternatives, or you need to create like resistance to uncertainty when you are dealing with the future, and how to kind of these competencies could be then developed. Then there are a bunch of tools that we already have in our field, and it could be nice to try to combine these tools for each of these dimensions.
Well, I'm not going to put any public pressure on you, but we are doing an update of our competency model, and well, we may be in touch. Okay, but no public pressure here. Okay, if we could look maybe on page 28 for a minute here, and you mentioned. Well, let me just make a quick comment here. One of the things that was so pleasing as I was reviewing the initial work was I've done some similar work in the space. We don't need to go into that, but I was saying, well, I wonder, you mentioned Seligman in the beginning, the work of Seligman. I'm like, oh, good, check, right? Yes, very good, very good. And it was so pleasing to see that, like, some of the work that I would hope would be referenced in this, it was just like check. I mean, very, very thorough. Like, I mean, it was almost like, God, I have no good opponent questions to ask because you've thought of all the different angles. So I thought you did a very, very great job on the literature research. But the foresight styles assessment was one of the tools that some kind of a similar space. And I was pretty familiar with that work, and we tried to use it. We used it, but we felt like, and I'll be interested to hear your comments, like so many assessments, you could kind of tell what the right answer was. And, it was very obvious, like if you wanted to be a futures thinker, you answered the questions a certain way. And you could, I'm a very good futures thinker, right? So I guess how in the development of your model, did you address that tendency for people to want to get the right answer, and how did you handle that in your own work?
Well, this is really, really an important and interesting point. I think there were like many aspects to this. I try to remember all of them. Well, first of all, this is a question which we get also often, because if you look at those 20 questions we have, if you really want to get like the highest score, you probably might be able to figure out like where to tick the score. But luckily, the psychologists who were involved in this project helped us with understanding that actually many of these questions, even though they may seem obvious, people are actually quite honest when they respond to this. If you are not using this kind of a test, for example, to evaluate if they are going to get employed or to get some reward, if you're just doing it for their own development, why would they check the boxes the way that you imagine that they should? Like, what's the benefit for them? And so for this reason, and also, of course, it has to do with how the questions are framed. And this is really where I think, for example, with I don't remember anymore exactly how the foresight styles assessment was exactly done. But this is where especially the field of psychology and all that statistical understanding they have there comes into hand. Like the research you have behind like one single sentence and how that works and how people respond to it and how they understand it, it's huge. So it's not just a sentence you throw there and you see, what people will respond, but it's something that is being tested and revised. And, like we have used hours just, discussing one or two words in that sentence and evaluated data. And that kind of also is related to the way how people respond. if you write it in a way that it's because also the idea is that people respond with intuition. You don't stop to think, you just kind of respond like, what's your first feeling? And that is also depending if that the question has to be such that you do get that intuition. That it's not like you're like, what do they want me to say? And what does it ask and what does this mean? It has to be a question which just kind of flows into your mind and you know what you're going to respond. And then just finally, what we actually did with the scale, I think it's mentioned somewhere in the book, is that we did test it with this so-called social desirability.
Yes.
And there is a way to kind of test people who respond to the scale, then test them with a social desirability scale, which measures basically the fact that if people are likely to respond to these questions in a way that they can try to please whoever is asking it. And what we found out was that those people who were more likely to try to please, they still did not respond differently to our scale. So it didn't influence them the way. And this is again like something that's, well, coming from the background of like social science or political science, I would have never even known that you can do this kind of tests.
Which actually that's a good lead to a follow-up question then. So you mentioned how you started in sustainability, came into foresight. How did you connect into the psychological world and really find some, because I've done a little bit of that crossover work and it's not always easy to find somebody in that space who understands what we're trying to get at. So what was that journey like?
Well, I do have to say that was, I think, the luckiest thing. That was pure luck.
Good for you.
There was a course at the university, I think 2015, somebody from our department organized a course with a headline of futures consciousness. And that was at the time when I had started like, okay, now I need a framework to, study these elite members. So let's go to this course. And on that course, we had a lecturer from United States, Enrico Wensing. And as part of that course, we were supposed to start like developing an article. And we got into like, we could suggest topics. And I suggested this topic. I said, like, I would really like to see, like, what kind of questions do you ask if you want to know how people are future conscious? And luckily, there were a number of people on that course, like Matti, I don't know if Titta is here, who were excited about this. And so was this Enrico Wensing, and he was a psychologist. And so he got involved, and we started kind of working on this. And he kind of brought us the understanding, like, guys, if you're really going to do this, you need psychologists. This is, you need us. But even he told, like, yeah, maybe I'm a little bit of a wrong type of a psychologist. We need a social psychologist who knows the statistics. I remember the moment when he asked, like, Matti and Sanna, do you understand the statistics? And we went like, well, we've done some statistics, but little did we know.
Right.
But he said, like, yeah, and I think we both went like, but it might be good if there's somebody who kind of really understands this. And so Enrico said, I know this Fanny, that let's bring her along. Let's ask if she's interested. And Fanny was already then interested, studying like environmental or sustainability attitudes and environmental attitudes of people. And so it didn't take us long to convince her or for her to kind of get the idea, like, yeah, this future thinking might actually be like related to that. So it was pure luck.
Well, as they say, luck favors the prepared. So well done on that, because that's a great partnership to make that work. Let's jump up to page 37, where you started the methodology, and a question popped up to me that I'm not sure. I'm just curious how you think about it, where you start to talk about the use at the personal level, and one of the threads that I think we've seen developing in the field the last 5 or 10 years is this idea of, how might we apply futures thinking to individuals to help them plan their own life, personal futures. seen a couple of dissertations and so on. And we teach that a little bit. So I don't know to what extent, if any, you've thought about how you might be able to apply this framework to help, just to help people plan their life a little bit.
Yes, we have actually already used the test on these courses for the futures competence, like I mentioned, my colleagues here at the center are giving to, for example, these oh my gosh, OPPO. What is an OPPO? These teachers who like educational guidance teachers.
Yeah.
One of them there. And so we started kind of testing or using this test with them and kind of giving them the chance to use it also with their students or those people whom they are guiding. And so we have been kind of having some initial experience from that as well.
I mean, it's just, you can see there's so many different ways that we can apply this. It's very exciting. All right, so that's good to see that you've been thinking about that. I have a couple of children who are in at the university, and for all those years, I never knew that they were listening to me because they come to me and say, "Should I go in this major? Or are they going to automate that out of existence?" So they've become personal futures planners, even despite their despite me, I suppose. All right, let's go up to page 53, if you will. And you had make sure I answer this question or ask this question properly, where you were talking about only focusing on time, initially trying to think about how to frame the model. I mean, it's a little detailed question, but should it just be about how futures think about time, or should we think about a more holistic idea of how we think about the future? And I noticed that you had referenced Zimbardo's time work, which we had used, where somebody developed a framework just around how people think about time in the future. And so that might have been, maybe that was one of those points where we decide, how do we want to do this framework? Do we want to just do it about how people think about time in the future, or do we want to think more holistically? So what was that decision process like? How did you work through that? Is that a fair way to ask that question?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
certainly. I guess that already was obvious from all the research or from all the studies we had already done in futures research, that somehow when you start reading futures research literature, you realize that it's not only just a question of like, do I think 50 years ahead or 10 years ahead, or do I just think about the future or the past? So that you kind of quite soon you kind of start see that the systemic, holistic kind of approach, that you need something more than just the kind of time orientation. And I guess also, if we only wanted to focus on time orientation, they are already quite nice measures for that. So, there was nothing new to develop on that front, or maybe there was, but at least we couldn't see, such a gap in that direction.
It's maybe just a little bit. So if I could think through the timeline, because you mentioned you went all the way back to 2015. So as you're working through in kind of the framework is developing, does it take, I don't know, is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, where you start to say, oh, I think it's maybe not 5 components, but it's 7 components, but like, because I could imagine that in the beginning, you're just saying, oh, there's all these interesting ways that we could do this. Is there some sort of moment where you go, I think we've got our framework, and now we just gotta, did you start from there? Did it come at the very end? Was it somewhere in the middle? Where did it start to feel like, oh, now I think we've got it?
Yeah. Well, I guess the original 5, which was based on the literature review, that came out quite early.
Okay.
And it kind of seemed to stick. But I guess the real moment came when we had the first test out, and we had the first test data, and Fanny coming and saying, it works. That it wasn't just like, our idea, like, yeah, these 5 sound nice. But she actually, could show us with the statistics that these 5 actually do create a coherent concept. and they like that they do go together. And I think that was the moment when we were like, yes. But
Right.
that did come quite early already. And then, modifying and kind of checking and testing and retesting, that's then took a lot of time, a lot more time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So if we could just go ahead to page 55, where we have the starfish, which I love that model. The dimension on concern for others. So if I could just set this up a little bit, I mentioned that we had some complementary research fields. So I done some research in a book around individual values, right? How people develop their preferences over time and so on, right? So having been in that space, one of the issues there, one of the models that came across was called spiral dynamics. And one of the ideas in spiral dynamics is that most value systems, people believe that if only the rest of the world would adopt my system, we'd be all set. And that there was this emerging values type that finally says, hey, maybe there isn't one right answer for everybody. So, and now the language that the spiral dynamics uses, first tier thinking is my system is the best one. Second tier thinking says, well, it depends on the situation. So there's this idea that the second tier thinking is going to save us. And as I was looking at your concern for others, it kind of, it raised that, I guess, issue, whatever you want to call it, from my own research. And one of the things that I've worried about or concerned about is trying to think about, I agree with this point that the idea of a tolerant approach that says there's not one right answer is a good positive thing. But you get into this kind of snobbery where I am second tier and you're just a mere first tier thinker. And I worry about that. And I see a little bit of that. And I don't know if you came across it but in the futures field, it's like, I am a highly evolved second tier thinker and I have a trouble, and I think while we'd agree, this is a wonderful thing. I am a little, in that concern for others, I think there's a way that can come out kind of sideways. I don't know if you've had any experience around that as you were doing your research, that concern for others becoming like, if only you believed what I believe. And I guess as you were developing that particular dimension, were there any issues along, maybe it wasn't that issue, but were there any issues that came up as you were developing that concern for others?
Many.
Oh, please. Please.
Yes. I think that has been like the dimension which has been like received most critique and most questions. And I think I'm still not yet sure if we've managed to phrase it in a way that it would not have this aspect what you're talking about. Because well, there have been like so many different aspects to it. One of them is that what I find personally quite funny even is that many people say like, oh, but this is very value laden. If you are concerned about others, that's about values, as if all the others were not. As if it's not a value that you think far or close, or if you believe in yourself or not, or if you believe in faith rather than yourself. Many of them are value questions. And so, but there is still something in especially on that dimension that kind of raises this question. And I guess until now, the kind of the interesting thing is that within psychology, we can really identify that there are people who have differences in this. There are those of us who are very concerned of others, but they are mostly concerned of their family and those near to them. And then there are those who are like concerned of the whole planet and might not care so much about the nearest. And the question is that, do you really say that either one of them is better? And I think the answer, what I have kind of come up with, or what I think, is that we actually need them both. It's not either or. But of course, with the scale, you do get better grades if you think like for the broader rather than just for the narrow. And so in that sense, it is a tricky thing. And that actually is related to the whole discussion I've had with some people and some colleagues about the question like how descriptive or prescriptive this whole model is. And I have to say that I think it's a really like a tricky balance. And I think I'm tipping myself sometimes going into the more prescriptive side, whereas at some points I'm going for the descriptive. At best, I think it could actually work for both. Because in a way, we can just like say that people are different, and that's actually something that we should appreciate. Like I said in my lecture, I don't think we can all change and we can all become perfect in all of these. It's, you know, we can have like all kinds of future ideals, but changing the whole humanity is not one of those, which I'm hoping for. It would make us too similar to each other.
Yeah, so maybe just, I'm not sure, you may have answered it, but I'll just try to follow up on the ranking of the hierarchy question, because again, in my work, we're developed a values system. I have given the talk, I don't know, 50 times, and 49 times there's been at least one question where somebody hates the hierarchy thing. And we'll say, you know, this is, you're implying that these values are better. Now, I've tried many different explanations to say that that's not what we're trying. It's not what we're attempting to do here, but there's still, there's that perception that that's what it is. Anything that has a ranking or and higher, for some folks, hierarchy is just, you know, it's just a bad thing. So I don't know, have you guys thought through any, other than saying, you know, we want to balance I think that's a good answer, the prescriptive and the descriptive. Any thoughts on how you're going to address the inevitable ranking hierarchy questions that you will get every time you share this publicly?
Well, I guess at some point, we did have an idea of, rather than having like a scale of like not something and something, having like just like 2 dimensions. And I think, if I remember correctly, at some point, our psychologist told us that those are actually quite tricky, that there is a danger of actually measuring 2 different things with the same scale. And so we gave up on that. But yeah, I guess I don't have a good answer to that. It is something that might, like, any good ideas, welcome.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, I say one person, but then that means everybody else basically gets it and they understand, right? So most people understand, like, yes, we understand that that's what you're doing and we're okay with it. So it's just one of those things that I've now learned to rehearse. I'm not sure I have the best answer, but you know, anytime you develop a new model or framework, you're going to have there'll be like that typical question that you're going to get each time, right? So I guess another aspect, and I thought you explained it well, but it might be nice to hear a little bit more about it, is this, I don't know if it was a deliberate choice to balance the sort of individual agency and the concern for the collective, but did that just emerge organically, or was that a choice that we wanted to have both of those ideas in there? So we have like the agency beliefs on one side of our starfish, and then we have the sort of concern for others. And I think that's a nice balance, but was that a force fit, or did you find that actually is a really good way to measure futures or describe futures consciousness?
Well, I guess that did appear really naturally as well.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of came from the kind of thinking that your personal idea of kind of being able to influence the future or to do something about it, or having like this possibility and believing that whatever you do, that it might have an impact, was really foundational in terms of like, why would you be interested in the future otherwise? Because if you don't believe you can change it, then you can just kind of, you know, expect and it will just come all and it's going to fall on your lap. So having this agency actually kind of makes the whole thing of being interested in the future, kind of, it motivates that.
I guess along those lines, I don't know if you've had the opportunity yet I guess deliver the instrument in different cultures, because I know that I've worked in some regions of the world where futures thinking is really a brand new is a brand new thing, and you know, just the whole idea that the future might turn out differently. That it's not predetermined is in some cultures is a relatively maybe even controversial idea. So have you had any of those experiences yet where maybe you've seen one particular dimension where a culture it's just way different than other cultures, so to speak? Is that a fair question?
Certainly.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we have had, like, the data we have until now is very kind of from a similar Western culture.
Yes.
And I do hope that we would get the chance of actually doing this in different cultures. But again, now knowing how much of statistical work it requires, it's not the kind of thing that you just kind of, do like that. So it requires a lot of planning and maybe adjusting the questions and testing different types of questions and everything. But certainly, I think it would be really fascinating to test different cultures and to see how these kind of the aspect that we here, for example, take as granted might be totally different in other cultures.
Right.
Yeah. But even I think it's surprising, like there are surprisingly many variations even within the same culture, or if we can even say it's the same culture here than in the United States or something. But let's say in this Western kind of thinking, there is a lot of variation even within that. And especially this, I think I sometimes give lectures on students who are not future students, but on some other courses, especially on environmental issues. And I think they always are so delighted about the idea that, like, yeah, that the future actually is not decided. And, they've told us that this is what's going to happen, and we have just bought it. We hadn't ever actually thought that could something else be possible.
Yeah, no, if I can give the audience a flavor of the kinds of questions that I could see this model helping us answer, it's probably a little bit more of a US centric observation, but my intuitive observation in working with audiences, I've done lots of projects over the last 25, 30 years, is in the last 5 or 10 years that it seems to me that individuals' views of the future have become really kind of fear-based and gloomy. Again, if you've been watching what's going on over there, you can probably understand a little bit, but strikingly so. And now, so I can anecdotally observe that, but I don't have any model to say, is that really what's happening? So I guess, I don't know, do you think that that's the model might be able to help us get at some of those, even though it's obviously aimed at the future, that can give us this sense of, how are people's views of the future changing? Do they feel more powerful? Do they feel less powerful? Or any thoughts on how we might use that framework to, or maybe if you don't mind, if you've seen that sort of apprehension about the future in any of the work that you've done so far?
Well, certainly, I think that's something that I have faced in many places, this kind of fear of the future, and at least, but it's, I don't have the kind of empirical evidence to say that if this is really the case, because at the same time, I can remember myself in the 80s being certain that, the nuclear bombs are going to destroy the planet, and that's it. So at the same time, it's difficult to say that if that has really changed. And, but I cannot think of a way, at least for now, how we could actually use this model to kind of describe that change. But I think what we can use it for is for people to realize that this is not the future we have to deal with, or we have to kind of just accept that we can become more reactive and we can try to find alternatives. But I don't know if this can be, I would have to think of that a bit more, if it can be kind of found or used to kind of really describe the change in these future images.
if I could follow up on that, I do remember the point when you were talking about how the elites thought about the future, that and you had an observation that we've come across in our work as well, that many folks feel like my personal future is going to be fine, but the rest of you, oh boy.
Yes.
And did you, so your model was finding the very same thing. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm not sure. I'm just thinking if we actually found that in here so much,
Or is it in the
but
literature?
it's
right?
more in the literature. Also, many Finnish researchers have come up, like for example, late Anita Rubin had exactly this same, and I think it's that is something that has been kind of related. Like all the time when I've been developing this, it has been something that I have been thinking of. That how come there is this difference? That what does it tell us about us? And I guess if I remember correctly, I actually do have some ideas here in the discussion, if I remember correctly, that how it might be that they're like people who do not see this connection, that it might be, for example, due to the fact that their systems understanding is not very strong, that they see the future for themselves, or they see the future for the, or let's say it this way, that they see the news in the headlines, but they don't actually see how those headlines are going to affect themselves. And when they think about the future, they don't, somebody else somewhere else is going to starve and not have food or suffer from the sea level rising, not me.
Right.
And it might be that this would be something that would be interesting to kind of go on with, is that does it, for example, have to do with a systems perception, that people don't make these connections in their heads? But I don't have an answer to that yet.
Well, that's any good model should have lots of unanswered questions, right? That sets you up for the future. If we could jump ahead just a little bit up to page 69, where you talked about the different profiles, and so I'm going to ask maybe I can ask two questions there. One of them is, so one of the tools that we've used a bunch and other futurists have used, we call them futures personas, where we basically take some data and from that try to create a quote representative person, which is a very sort of dangerous generalization to make, but it's useful. So if you were, for instance, trying to develop a campaign to get people to do better composting or something like that, you would imagine, what's the type of how might a quote typical person respond to that kind of a campaign? So it gives you a way to kind of bring the future to life. So I wondered whether you had either entertained the possibility that you might be able to develop some kind of use the framework to help develop these personas. And I think it would obviously depend on the situation and the context. But did you have that discussion? And I could also see that maybe you just say, we don't want to do that. So not everybody, like I say, when you generalize, it's a little risky, right? So what were those conversations like? You thought that through?
Well, we have kind of, I think that's one of our kind of wishes for the future.
Yeah, sure,
would be to actually, because the problem is that that we would actually like to do that based on data. And so what we would need is a massive amount of data. And so with that, we could maybe find like the typical profile. So let's say that there are 5 or 6 or I don't know, 10 typical profiles that, somebody has a strong concern and strong agency, but then they are low on systems and low on time. And with this kind of a person, these are the kind of issues that they get interested, or these are the kinds of issues that kind of attract them to start thinking in different terms. But this is really like something to ongoing, or let's say that hopefully we will get there. But I think it would be really interesting to do. I think I would leave it then for practitioners to decide if they want to really use it in practice and if it's useful. But in terms of research, I think it would be that is something that we have been kind of throwing in the air, that this would be fun to do.
Yeah, I'm like we were working on a project on I guess call it the circular economy, which without getting into all the details of that, And I know our client was hoping that we could introduce a new, we'll just call it a circular based product next year. And I'm like, next year? And like, we're lucky if, 1 in 100 people even knows what the concept is. And like, so often, right, that the future, as futurists, we see ideas way before they're going to actually be useful in society. And I think I was just, wondering, one of the ways that we can use the personas and personas based off of a useful framework is to have a better idea, like who is the first person? Because the first person to do something new is much different than the person who adopts it. Like my mom, rest her soul, was still never bought one of those damn cell phones and had a wire line right to the better end and said, I don't see why I need one of those, right? So you have these different kinds of personas. So I think that might be an interest. So did the team thought that you saw some potential in it, and that's one of the things that you need to look at further, but
Yes.
you weren't opposed to that idea.
No, I guess
Okay.
the question more is that do you want to apply it, or what
Yes.
do you want to apply it to?
Well, I do think there's a lot of interest in that. So I'll say from the field that we find that exciting. Okay, so more directly related to page 69, where you talk about this idea of the openness to alternatives, kind of one versus critical thinking. And I thought, I totally understand the contrast there. And I think you mentioned the idea about bridging the gap between those, right? So there are different kinds of openness, right? And I guess maybe if you could maybe explain a little bit how you saw those two, I guess you call them branches underneath that concept. And do we need to bridge that gap, or is it fine to have those two different kinds of openness?
Difficult question. I guess this comes back to the question which we had earlier, like do we have these 5 dimensions, or should we actually have
Yes.
more?
Maybe that's it.
And like for example, from this study which I did with the elite members, there were actually 7, because you could see that there was a difference between the alternatives in terms of like openness to experience, and then the critical aspect was actually like gave different results among the people. And the same was with the time perspective. There were people who were future oriented, but they were not still so interested in the consequences in short or long term. And so I don't know if it's like necessary to actually kind of have them converge together. But I guess what is interesting is to see that there really actually are differences amongst people in that. And especially like in this case, those people who were these skeptical elite members, for them, this critical side was like really like the strong one. That they could imagine things, but the first thing would be like, but how do you do that? Or does it make sense? Or it's too difficult, or people won't accept it, or their approach to the new idea, which they could also, they had the imagination to come up with it. But the attitude was like, like being skeptical, basically, that this is too hard. Why would we do this? Or let's try something else, or especially combined with this time aspect of not being so concerned what will happen next. Or maybe even more, these people then tended to rely and think like, if we wait for a while, somebody will come up with a better answer, so we don't have to do this nasty thing you're suggesting us to do now. That if we wait for a while, we will find something better.
I guess maybe along those lines, and I agree that, well, all right, I'll ask that separately, but my anecdotal experience is the same. That is, as a rule, people are much better at shooting down alternatives than they are at proposing new ones. I mean, it's just, that's the easy part is to say why something won't work is fairly easy. Trying to come up with something that will work is very difficult. And I don't know, did you see is that the reason for that split? As you saw that there was really it's almost a different kind of skill set? And is my observation that
the critical thinking would be a lot bigger than the ability to generate new ideas. Is that what the data was telling you, or?
Well, at least within this group, since,
Yes.
you know, it's a small group, so I can't like generalize the results, but
Yes.
within that group, what was quite actually interesting in my mind was that these skeptical people or the skeptical participants were also very imaginative. They had like loads of great ideas. So it wasn't the lack of imagination, like it was the moderates who had like who were much less likely to kind of, you know, present new ideas or different ideas. Because they, you know, that was not their strength. But they were also maybe critical, but the skeptical ones, they also had this capacity to imagine, which was, I thought, was like an interesting combination.
Yes. And I guess that was the other question that was popping into my head is, how did you and the team, I could imagine, even if the 5 emerged fairly early, there must have been tremendous pressure to go to 7. And so how did you, was it the psychologist, say, stop doing that? You know, the survey designer is telling you can't do that, or, so how did you manage to stick to 5? That's not easy. I mean, really not easy. But I think in terms of my guess, with the user friendliness of the 5 and the 20 question instrument is really quite nice. But I can imagine a little bit, maybe tell us a little bit of the struggle to, we'd much rather have 120 questions in 9 dimensions than 5 and 20, right? How did you wrestle with that as a team?
Well, you know, we did start with 160.
Yeah, right. See, no.
So yes. Well, first of all, like I said, thanks for the statistics. There is a way to find out ways to kind of avoid questions which actually do kind of just measure or which the statistics show that they actually do measure the same thing. And so that was helpful. We did have this discussion of having 7 rather than 5. And I think luckily the statistical analysis did show that in many cases they do also go together, that there are people who are imaginative and critical. So it's not like always that they are separate. And so that it was kind of possible to, or it kind of did make sense to combine them, but also from the kind of validate or from in terms of content and what we kind of wanted to convey with the model was that we thought that that we really need these both. That even if there might be people who are not so strong on these, and maybe in some cases with you know, research setups like this one, we might have to kind of separate them so that we can kind of get more interesting results. But in general, with the model, it kind of conveys our purpose or the original idea of the dimension of openness to have them both. And same with time perspective.
Well, I've been through the struggle and I appreciate where you landed. And I think you made the right choice there. So if we go to page 75, where we have this nice figure that kind of puts I guess I wanted to ask you if there was a reasoning for why, in particular, why you put openness to alternatives at the center. Is that because it's the foundational influential point, or is it because it looked good on paper? I mean, is there a reason for why that's there?
Yes.
Okay.
I really struggled. Well, yeah, I really struggled with this picture. This was one of those things which I kind of trash binned several times and thought like, I'm not gonna get into this because it's difficult, and it's difficult to say like what is connected to what and how do you want to present it. But yeah, then after all, it kind of seemed that time and agency were like the foundational things. Without those, you know, the rest of it doesn't actually make sense. And so then if you kind of build on the system's perception, the concern for others is, at least in our mind, it kind of follows the same logic that if you are systems, if you have like systems perception, you should then start thinking of your surroundings and how others are doing as well. So they kind of follow together. But I think the openness is in the center, because in a way it kind of, that's like the central thing in terms of future thinking, that if you don't see it as being open, again, it doesn't make any sense. Or it does make sense, but then again, like being future conscious doesn't make much sense, because you can just wait and see how the future comes. So in that sense, openness to alternatives is there, because I thought that it was like something so central to all of it.
I got the impression that it was like the wheel. Is that, okay, that was what you were trying, okay. All right, wanted to make sure that made sense. A quick follow-up on the systems perception. So one of our core courses that we teach in our masters is systems thinking. And so it's a semester-long course just on systems. So obviously a very critical, essential part of futures thinking. And our experiences of how students go through that is I guess it's kind of twofold. There are a small group of students who intuitively get it and can map it, give them a system and they can create a model and map it out. That's the small minority. And then there's the mere moral human beings, which I would put myself in that, who think, I understand kind of how these things connect, but please don't ask me to draw it, please. Right? Because I don't want to do it. And it's very so we have this kind of dichotomy, right? Where I think almost anybody can maybe be trained or develop their understanding of how it works, but to actually like really master that is a very, and I taught systems once and I said, I'll never do it again. It was terrible. I said, there's a percentage of the students in the class who know this way better than I do. So I don't know if that comes through in the research at all, that there's this, again, this seems to be this pretty big gap between people who are just naturally adept at it versus the rest of us who have to kind of muddle through and try to figure it out. But again, I can, if you explain how a system works, I can get it, right? But if you ask me to explain how it worked, I would struggle. I guess that's the thing that we've noticed.
Yeah, this is interesting. I guess we should kind of go back to the data and see how does it look like from the data, that if for example, it seems that people have the majority is more to the kind of to the center rather than the end. But I think systems thinking in general is really like a fascinating aspect of this, because there's I was presenting this model while ago in a ministry at the Finnish government, and after my presentation, one of them came to talk to me and said yeah, this is really fascinating that, I have been to systems thinking courses, and I think she was like the foresight contact in the ministry. So she was like into this thing. But I have never thought outside the human systems. I have never thought that we are also part of, the planet and the universe, and that the systems are actually bigger than, just the systems we are here in the human systems. And that my colleague who is working with the sustainability issues, she has known this always. How did I miss this? And I thought it was really yeah. But so and also from the with the interviews with the elite members, it was really interesting that actually it seemed many times that those people who kind of saw themselves as being systems thinking or were kind of talking in those terms, or somehow felt that it was a strong aspect for them, they often saw systems as constraints rather than possibilities. So that they were, this is really interesting and we'd like to do this and it would be important for everybody. But actually, because we live in this kind of system, be it the ministry or be it the economical structures or whatever, they don't allow us to do that. So that the systems actually, for people to be strong in systems thinking, at some points might actually constrain them from seeing other things. So they're also I guess systems thinking, you could kind of see that there's somebody who's just thinking systems in general, And then there are those who can actually see beyond the systems, the larger systems, and also see them as like enablers rather than constraints.
Yeah, just to give you an idea of how that works. So my first job interview as a futurist, I go in, you're expecting the kind of standard questions, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And what became my future boss is, could you please describe the circulatory system of a dog? Can you imagine that as your first question on a job interview? Yeah, so do you understand how to describe systems? And I didn't pass out, but I think I answered the question and I did get the job, but try it. It's if you're bored at home, try that tonight. Anyway, but that's the way we try. How do things connect, right? And I guess you may have hinted at this, but I think it's worth just a quick follow-up on when you talked about the descriptive versus prescriptive. And I was just thinking about when you were saying that, how the openness is indeed, one might argue the kind of the cog, the heart of the system. So have you started to muck around with interventions yet? Like, all right, so if you are low on openness, if you will, how might we address that? Or is that phase 2? Or what are your thoughts on that? Sort of more, how do we help it, if you will?
Yeah. Well, certainly, like I said earlier, we have had these discussions with colleagues on how to kind of combine this with futures competence teaching, and I'm quite sure that there are methods in there. The question, and what is I find really interesting, is that which ones of those methods actually do produce results, because there have also been some studies who show that these are even though these are things that we can develop and we can kind of exercise them and all that, they are quite deeply ingrained in our minds. So having like one workshop doesn't really change your thinking. You might, for a second, you might be kind of like, yeah, now I understand systems a bit better. And next week, it's gone.
Right.
So what is really interesting, I think, would be to study like these longer term processes and interventions, because I do believe that those are the ones where we could actually really see change. But there is interesting, like we have been like collecting examples of from psychological research. I have become to love psychologists because they have all these funny setups and then they test all kinds of funny things. Read some of the system stuff, for example. They have like really exciting setups for how people have been asked to, develop systems thinking, and how do they measure if people are really systems thinkers.
Right.
That was a side note. But so from these kinds of setups, I think it would like there are some examples, for example, that they have asked people to imagine future ahead to the future, and then after that they have to do something else. And we do have examples of these kinds of studies, and I think those are really, really interesting. For example, just to give an example, there was some creativity exercise that people needed to do, and another group was asked to imagine the future 5 years ahead, and then after that, imagining test what they had to do. They had to do this creativity exercise, and then another group had to think 50 years ahead. And then after that, imagining they have to do this creativity exercise. And those who thought 50 years ahead managed much better with the creativity exercise. So there is a lot of this kind of stuff, but we would need to kind of collect it and use it and to kind of combine that with all the knowledge we have from the practical, experience from running workshops and running all kinds of interventions. Because that, and that's why I think it's so interesting and important that to kind of bring that knowledge there is already in the field of psychology, which many of the futurists are not actually very familiar with.
Well, this is kind of a funny question. You could decline. I'll allow you to decline to answer this, but when I gave my own defense, one of my examiners said that your work is entirely too practical, And here in academia, we're not concerned with whether things can be used in the real world, which was a shock to me as due to the So I'll put that to you. I mean, it sounds like your committee, obviously, I think you've found a nice balance between the theoretical and the practical, because as I listened, I see so many application areas. And to me, that's what we should be doing this work for. It was frowned upon in my case, but so have you, how did you kind of navigate that? You know, I'm not developing as he called it, you're developing a consulting model here. And I'm like, well, I did think I was going to use it, but okay. So how did you balance that sort of, we need to do traditional academic work versus, you know, come out and help the world? Remember, I said she could decline to answer this because I'm not sure what the answer to that would be, but I'm sure it came up at some point. And how did you navigate that?
Certainly it has come up. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I have to say, it has been quite fascinating because, like I said, I came from my practitioner background. So I think I was kind of quite familiar with, you know, the problems in practice and how things need to be sorted out, or what kind of solutions we try to look for. And I have to say, honestly, I think at some point earlier in my life, I even thought sometimes researchers are useless because, you know, they are just interested in the theories and you know, what do we do with them in practice? And so it has been like a learning curve for myself to also learn to appreciate the research and the importance of like having things actually researched rather than just like, yeah, I feel like this here. So from that sense, I think what has, like for me, it has become more of a mission to actually do research and to really like find the kind of empirical evidence and to kind of find like this solid ground on what we can then build on the practical issues. But I do think I guess at the moment I'm so, and I got so much interested in that, and I think now I'm more oriented like leaving the practicalities or the practical application to others. I do wish that, you know, people take this up and develop it in all kinds of directions, but I think I'd rather just kind of go on with the research itself.
So you've been converted, it sounds like. It is a real issue, and I feel that foresight is a relatively in the scope of academic disciplines is relatively new. So we are very practitioner led, is, you know, practitioner heavy. And to your point, like if people would just say, who cares about the theory? But I had this very, very much the same experience is that when I dove into that aspect, going, oh, this is, now I'm more, to your point, you almost get more interested in, and then let other people do the application. So it's good to see that you went through that sort of metamorphosis, right?
I could maybe add one more aspect to that, because I was also very lucky at the same time when I was doing this. I actually was working with a colleague who is somewhere up there, who is actually working in a company who is creating a tool of a psychometric test. Not in futures field, more in the kind of like a team building field. But through her, I could actually see how does a business work when they do these psychometric tests, and that was really useful also in those terms that we at some point thought that, okay, how about like, you know, applying this to practice, or especially at some point they were like, we are at the business school here. So there were many people going to say like, yeah, you know, this is going to be an interesting tool that could be sold and everything. And if I hadn't that experience of seeing how those businesses work and how much more work you actually need to do in order to make that a business, I might have made the mistake of trying to do something like that with this. But, you know, seeing that, I realized like, I'm going to leave that to others, that it's not for me.
No, that's terrific, terrific. Let's go to page 78 here, where you talk about education, foresight, practice.
Sorry, can you say the page again? Sorry.
Sorry, 78. And I think you've touched on it a little bit, but just give us a little bit more maybe. So what advice would you give to educators in terms of using the model? Do you have some sort of ideal? Obviously, there's lots of ways we could use it, but in your mind, you say, "Ooh, I think this is," as we were developing this, or as we thought about developing this, we said, here would be the no-brainer. We should use it this way. So did something like that emerge as you were working on it? Obviously, having gone through the education, you've experienced it yourself, and so in retrospect, I wish we had. Might be another way to think of it.
Yeah. Well, I guess the most obvious response or answer to that is actually the way how we have kind of used it in some of our education, and already quite early on when I started presenting this in conferences, and there were practitioners there who said, like, when you presented this, I realized that all the material I have in my futures education courses or whatever they were running, that they actually do fit quite well with this structure. And so for many people, and also in our courses now, we have started to use it as like the general structure for the different things that should be covered when we kind of discuss futures, or when we like build futures competencies. So having it as just like a the first we'll talk about time, and then we talk about agency, and just going through each of these dimensions, that at least has worked for us in many cases. And I guess that would be like something to start out with.
Well, I can certainly see it. It's really wonderful. All right. On page 81, where you talk a little bit about the modeling and measurement, and it kind of came up a little bit, but let's dig in and ask the question directly. So you settled on the 5. What was the hardest thing you had to leave out? Was there one thing that you're like, oh, I can't, because then it opens the door? Were there a few elements that you felt, I don't know, that were just really challenging to leave out? Well, this is like airing the dirty laundry, I suppose, right? But
That's a good question.
but you mentioned the moral
the
centrality.
Yeah.
And
the moral centrality. Yes. I'm just thinking, I think they might not have been like other dimensions, but aspects of the dimensions. For me, I think it was painful to see that under the openness to alternatives, we actually didn't need the intolerance or uncertainty. Because for me, I saw that like really like an important aspect of it. But actually, with a test, we found out that the questions that we asked about the other aspects already gave the same answers than the questions on intolerance, on uncertainty. And so I still keep it there in the kind of description, because I think it kind of clicks in many people's minds when you realize that how difficult, like how that aspect is related to the fact that you don't see alternatives because you're afraid to see them. Right. But I guess that was one of the things which I would have liked to see also in their survey set, but we didn't need it. Okay. And like you said, the moral centrality is another one. And that was something that it's just like questions for that don't yet exist. Maybe somebody will develop them, or maybe we'll have to still revisit that. But I was actually thinking of that the other day, that even though I would have liked to have it, this kind of moral centrality being the kind of aspect of how people like really want to kind of follow their own morals, and the morals are the guiding light of their actions. But I think the more and more we have been using this, I've kind of started to think that the concern for others in a way is already enough. That we don't have to kind of build it into like Mother Teresa kind of test that, which one of us is going to be like the sacrificing the most, that it's enough already with this to kind of raise awareness or to kind of start thinking of these.
Well, that tells me it's a very robust model, that if you couldn't easily identify what you had to leave out, that's probably a good sign, right? Okay, I think I'm almost there. I see one last question here on really in the conclusion section, starting on 86. I don't know if there's anything you need to refer to. Now you've explained to me that your article number 5 about the connection between elites and sustainability was more of a kickoff than a conclusion, which I didn't get that the first time through. So obviously you started with this question: how do we how can we be more effective in particular around sustainability consumption? You went back and developed a model. Now that you've quote done that work, or pretty much, do you have any sense of what is it like? I personally really want to use this in the sustainability space because that's my thing. Or might you say that there are other places I want to take it, or are you just going to become a theoretician? I mean, as you think about what you want to do next with this, now that you've gone through and done the model, is it taking it into new subject areas? Or are you going to, as I say, maybe you become a model builder, right?
It's a hard choice.
Yes. And we have to make those choices, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think for the moment, I was left out with so much data and material on the kind of the sustainability issues and the consumption issues that I do want to kind of go on with that, at least for the moment. But at the same time, and I think my original idea was that that's where I'm going to go. And, I did this, and then let's hope that somebody else continues with that. But the longer I've been working with it, the more somehow curious I have become myself, like, what all that model could do and how all directions we could develop. I think at some point we talked like that we kind of with Fanny and Matti, we've been talking like, yeah, that's the nth paper we are going to write about. That we already have like topics for like, let's say 4 or 5 next papers that we would like to write on this. So the kind of curiosity grows when you kind of dig into deeper into this. So I guess I do hope that will have time for that as well, but I do not want to do that just all the time or do everything with it. And I'm not so much of maybe thinking in terms of like applying it to different fields, but maybe more like this, for example, this aspect of different cultures, like kind of making it more global. That now it's applicable to only certain types of environments, and it would be really, really interesting to kind of go somewhere else and see, how does it work in Ghana or Taiwan?
Well, it's so fascinating to me when you have so many places you can take it. That tells me you've done something good, right? It's not like I don't know what to do next. It's like, what of the many things that I could do next? So I think that's a sign of some really great work. So I thank you for answering my questions, and I will turn the protocol back to you. Is that right, Markku?
Not yet, because if you want to make
I make my statement now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, I'll stand here and I do have some closing remarks. It might be easier to not drag my computer up to the podium. How can we sleep when our beds are burning? Oh, what a wonderful quote. It was from the band Midnight Oil. And I thought, what a wonderful way to kind of frame this work. There's so many things that we need to deal with in the future. I'm struck by how urgent our work has become. We are really to the extent we can. We are really helping the world deal with some pretty serious what we call collapsed futures, if you will. So we need to be more effective.
And I think Sanna's work has really advanced or promises to give us some tools to advance that work. How can we become more effective in inspiring agency in people, inspiring concern for others, inspiring systems thinking? These are all things we need to do. And it's a really urgent need. So we talk a lot about knowing ourselves first as practitioners and knowing our audience. And that's one of our, it's been one of my themes for 25 years. And here we have, how do we know our audience? A wonderful validated tool for that. What a terrific, wonderful advance for the field. So, I've always felt like our toolkit was a little light on that. And I was saying, well, our toolkit has gotten a little bit heavier today. So thank you for that. And I think a deeper understanding of a futures consciousness it's a foundation of any engagement with a client. And when I say client, I just don't mean people who are giving us money, but if we're trying to help the public is our client. If we're writing a book, we're writing it for our client. So we always think in terms of how do we help our clients, right? And maybe that's not the right word, but if you'll allow that. And again, how do we become more effective in helping those clients, right? We talked in a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last few years. It's one of those full circle questions. The second book I read about the future was called The Image of the Future by Polak. And I think I mentioned earlier that there's been such a big gap in our work on how do people think about the future? How do people imagine the future? So from that seminal work back in the 70s to today, in the last few years myself, I've been working on developing some images of the future, positive images of the future. As I look at the work that's been done here today, I said, well, thank goodness I haven't finished yet, because I've really gotten some excellent tips on how can we position, use, and be more effective with these positive images that we're developing. So I think as a field, we're trying to kind of respond to that call in the 70s to help the world imagine more positive futures. And now we have some tools for that. So again, I think that focus is really important. And I also wanted to acknowledge the cross-disciplinary approach of the work. And we had a little fun with that earlier with the psychologists. But I mean, and Sanna attributed it to luck, but I suspect it wasn't luck. I suspect there was some skill in making that happen. And it's not easy. It is not easy. Again, having tried not just with psychologists, but with trying to do cross-disciplinary work in many different fields, it's not, they just don't get us, right? I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. I don't know how else to say it. And certainly we can be more effective at that, but actually making that happen is a very significant advance for the field. That is, we need to be better at it. We need to be better at it. So I did want to acknowledge that is a very important thing, and that's nothing to be minimized as we talk about the accomplishments of this work. That collaboration is really something that's going to help our whole field grow. And another theme that I thought I really wanted to call out as a valuable contribution is the work about the individual agency, individual empowerment. And I mentioned that we've seen this trend in the field towards what we call personal futures. How do I make my own life better? And if you allow just a brief story, I'm so happy to be here in Turku, and as I say, actually see y'all. Back in 2000, I went down to the Australian Foresight Institute, which is no longer around, but when Richard Slaughter had started the program down there, and I did a visit for 10 days. And one of the themes that came out of that visit was this, they were talking a lot about how, as futurists, we need to know ourselves better. And so I started teaching a little module in our class from that point forward about, knowing ourselves, how do we become better futurists? I suspect, and I don't know yet, but I suspect from this visit here today, I'm coming away with this, with a much deeper understanding of this framework that's going to characterize maybe the next 20 years of my work. Like how we have now a valuable, validated framework for helping us work more effectively with clients. It's been one of these urgent needs that we've talked about. And I'm just so excited to have this in my, as I say, in my toolkit. So I think that and applying that to all the individuals, whether they're clients or whether they're just individuals, I think that's a really important development. So I thank you for that. And I think in closing, I think one of the early chapters, maybe it was chapter 2, Sanna mentioned something called future something, where there's one thing that's happening and you have 10 futurists describing that one thing that's happening, and you have 10 names for that one thing that's happening. And we go try to explain it to the client, and every 10 people explain the same thing a different way. So a massive amount of work that went into this framework to come up with, and I pressed on the 5 because that is not an easy thing to do. And I think there are 5 very clear dimensions. I mean, I think anybody can look at those and go, I get it. That's really hard to do, folks. It's really hard to do. And I think, linking it to competencies, linking it to the work in the field. And so I think the sort of the clarity of the research and the clarity of how it's communicated, I want to make sure that it's clear how useful and important that is. Because we do have this tendency for every time somebody comes up with a new idea, they start saying, well, here's how we're supposed to do the future. So I think to me, you've come into the field and you've become a builder. You're building upon, you're acknowledging the good work of your colleagues, you're building on that work and you're taking it forward, and we don't have to start all over and try to figure it out. So thank you for building. You may have, it's just such a wonderful thing, because it's really how we're going to move forward. It's really how we're going to move forward. So again, we've heard so many different application areas. I hope you're excited about it as I am. I feel like I just want to get to work now. So I'm really thrilled by the work, and I feel like you've done a wonderful job answering the questions for us today. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I guess you can say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hines, for these kind words and your review for today. And I now respectfully invite any members of the audience who wish to offer comments on my thesis to ask the Custos for permission to speak. And also those people online who are invited to send your comments and questions through chat.
I don't hear much. So I think the topic has been exhausted for a while, and then this public defense of the doctoral dissertation is now concluded. Thank you.
Yes, coffee down at Markku. Welcome.